My Governor and Melanin. A while back I did a video about the use of the double weight sword to enhance sword fighting abilities. It was mostly gotten from a 5th century document by a man named Wegetius, 5th century AD, and it was again mentioned in the 15th century document, which we know as the Poem of the Pell. That's 1,000 years of difference. So apparently that was a time when, in the Middle Ages, Dark Ages, apparently that information was appreciated. My personal opinion is that is a valid technique. It was used, it was found useful in those days. However, it's we call it an ad hoc technique because basically you're supposed to be swinging a double weight sword around, generally in the technique that you'd use for your service weapon, with the hope that the muscles that you use in doing that are the same muscles that you use in doing this, and that if you do it with a double-weighted sword, you would enhance this, your service weapon's ability. I believe that's correct. But like I said, I think it's an ad hoc technique. It's not systematic. It's not as well thought out as it could be. And it is not, it's basically made for, here, you guys do this basic concept and you'll get something out of it. But for an individual, like a modern swordsman who wants to improve his technique, we can go a little bit deeper. I mean, I think that modern sports medicine over the previous 100 or 1,000 years has discovered some new things that we can look at. So let's take a look at that modern exercise physiology for the modern swordsman. You know, first I'd like to talk in some detail about ancient exercise. When we talk about the Western martial arts, HEMA, whatever you want to call it, there was a time way back when we assumed that people in the Middle Ages, Renaissance, just basically battered each other with big steel clubs and didn't have any more system or finesse than a caveman, because they didn't write it down, and if they did, we couldn't read it. We've been looking at manuscripts, treatises, fact books from the Middle Ages and Renaissance since then, and we discovered, yes, we can't always understand the system, but we know that there were many systems for fighting with swords and other weapons. So just because we can't read it doesn't mean they didn't have a system. I think we have the same prejudice now towards ancient exercise, and I think there's a couple of sources we might look at that sort of point us to a reconsideration of that. One I think is interesting is the Greek and Roman legend of Milo of Croton. Now he was the myth is that he was a landsman, and he had a calf, a newly born bull, I believe. And what he would do is go to the farmyard and put this calf on his shoulders and walk around the farmyard a little bit each and every day. Now this calf would be drinking its mother's milk and growing, and the understanding in this myth or legend is that as the calf grew, Croton would become stronger, because every day he was carrying this growing calf on his shoulders. Now, I don't see this as a literal, true telling of an actual event, primarily because it's not physically possible. The rate at which a calf will grow into a full-grown bull and the maximum weight there is beyond any human ability to adapt to. But it shows that the ancients knew the principles of overload training, of adaptation, of all the things that personal trainers now understand and take for granted in studying college courses and so on. So they knew that and then coded it in a myth or a legend so that it would carry on. It would be transmitted and shared between others who needed to know the knowledge. Another source is a man named Galen. He was, I think it's like the 2nd century AD, if I'm not mistaken. He worked as a physician for among other things, a physician for a gladiatorial stable, a ludus. And he wasn't a gladiator himself, but he repaired their injuries. He saw a lot of blood and a lot of internal organs and learned a lot from that. But also in his writings, he showed he had some understanding of certain exercises. And some of the exercises are pretty mundane, like digging a hole or climbing a rope. But some of them show that it's kind of like a glimpse into a different system. And there were apparently different exercises that gladiators used to develop their strength and abilities. It's as if there was a lot of other stuff that's been lost, and only his record saved it. Anyway, let's look at another one. In Northern Europe, there are large stones, manhood stones they call them. Generally speaking, in the order of like 300 pounds. Now, you don't walk up to that one and pick it up, although that would make you a man. People, generally speaking, can't do anything with those unless they're training. And I think it's interesting that they would say, let's put this manhood stone in the middle of the village and challenge our boys to try to lift it. With the understanding that they couldn't lift it right away, they'll go back and practice on 100-pound stones or 200-pound stones, and eventually get to where they can lift 300-pound stones. And that is an understanding of the adaptation and overload principles in personal training. Very interesting. There's no written record. There's an oral tradition connected with each of these stones. There's one stone in Greece where it's actually chiseled on it who actually lifted it. And of course the chiseling probably makes it a little bit lighter, but still that's 300 pounds, you know. If you can do that, if you have a village full of boys who've been practicing on that, even if they haven't been able to lift that one, you've got a small force of very strong warriors who can defend the village or your kingdom or whatever. Interesting, and I think that shows that the ancients had a lot more understanding of physical training and the science of physical training. Anyway, let's get on with our exercises. So now, what is, as a former personal trainer, I've had experiences with clients whereby they come into the gym, they say they're supposed to work out, and I ask them why. It's a simple enough question, but it seems not many people think about that. It's important to have a fitness objective, what you're trying to accomplish, what's your goal, right? In this case, if I hand a newbie some sort of single-handed sword, whether we're dealing with the Viking Age or far forward to a rapier, it's only 2 pounds, right? Switching to a waster, that's even less, right? And that's usually what we start training with. But let me mention this is a 2-pound piece of, or less, piece of wood. If I bring a 2-pound dumbbell into the Gold's Gym near me, right? And what's going to happen? Well, the muscled heads are going to say, oh, wait a minute. Something's wrong here. You know, this is not a lot of weight. It doesn't take any weight at all to move this around. That's not the problem. The problem is leverage. Okay, we talked about this before. It's a moment arm. And when you are rotating around a pivot point, on the other hand, if I'm using this as a lever to get something up, I'm creating torque over here without much effort. In this case, with a sword, the lever is working on you. You are dealing with the torque that this long moment arm is creating. So it's got to be something to consider. We're not lifting weights, but we're encountering resistance. So there's two kinds of movements we'll think about here. One is a dynamic movement, actually going from place to place. The other is I'm not going to call it a movement, it's a static exertion of force, static force versus dynamic force, right? You're resisting something else. Sometimes it's the sword's inertia, right? Sometimes it's the action of an outside force upon your sword. Otherwise, you're giving way and basically parrying directly. In terms of dynamic force, we're thinking in terms of Newton's law of motion. I believe it's his first law of motion. Correct me if I'm wrong. Any object with mass tends to remain at rest unless acted upon by an external force, and it continues in motion until acted upon by an external force as well. This can be expanded because you're also changing the speed, changing the direction of something. All these things are exerted. In our case, we're thinking about the hand, wrist, and arm. Now, I've got a basic fundamental movement that you might recognize. I'm doing like a figure 8 movement. And with the hand, it's doing a compound movement. We're not going to stick with this compound movement, though. We're going to break it up into its fundamental parts. And those are what we'll call deviation, and that is flexing the wrists towards and away from the ulnar and radius bones. Ulna and radius bones, forgive me. And the other one is a rotation, and that is rotation around the axis of the forearm. And basically the ulna and radius bones are sort of twisted around each other. Not literally, but it seems like that. So there's two movements that we want to deal with, that we encounter all the time with a sword, and we're going to develop some exercises to make ourselves a little stronger with that. So the first basic movement will be forearm rotation. And I can demonstrate this with this eskrima stick. I'm not rotating the shoulder, just trying to rotate the forearm. So I'll bend the elbow a little bit so you can see. This we used to use in eskrima class as a warm-up. And it's fine. The stick is very light. You're basically holding the middle. But I don't recommend moving ballistically like this, especially with the heavier training tool. I'm going to grab a convenient oyster. This is what you'll have laying around your training saw, right? Something like this. This weighs a little bit under 2 pounds, and it's probably ideal. So the rotation here, I'm going to move it fairly slowly. Although you do end up moving it quickly in combat, we're not training that way. So the weight, the balance point on this is near the hilt, a little bit clunkier than a real sword. So if I hold it here, I'm not encountering as much resistance as I'd like. So to challenge myself, I'm going to take it here, go back to the balance point, and slip it down a little bit. So I've got the heavier part here, right arm, right hand, moving it from like a 45-degree angle from horizontal up past horizontal to a 45-degree angle. Why am I just sticking with that movement? I go up here, I could hold this all day. My muscles are on vacation. We don't want them on vacation. We want them constantly under tension throughout the set until it's time to rest. So what I'm doing here is an external rotation. The weight is being moved towards the outside. We know this from sword combat. That's the outside. This is the inside. If I'm left-handed, that's the inside. That's the outside. Switching to the left. I'm doing the same exercise. I'm going outside. Outside rotation, right hand. Okay, moving slowly. In fact, from here, I'm going down. This is called an eccentric movement. Moving up is called concentric movement. And I want to emphasize the eccentric movement, so go down, move it down slowly as you do this. This will enhance your static strength and help you build up strength faster without too much stress on your forearm. Also, keep in mind, you're not just squeezing your hand. I can show you. I'm not doing the finger stuff. I'm keeping the same level of grip on my hand and focusing on rotating my wrist. It really helps to isolate the movement. After having done this for, I would say, 10 reps on either side, I'm going to do the inside. And I'm going to find a different level of resistance for the other side because I'm using a different set of muscles. Right. I'm using a different set of muscles. I can go through all the names for these things, but it doesn't help us here, right? In some cases we're using the same muscle, just in different ways. That's why we're switching from side to side. And again, I'm doing the inside rotation. Okay, this is a little bit fast here, but I just want to show you the basics. So we're doing inside rotation, outside rotation. These are fundamental movements that you'd use. I know for a single-handed sword, and indeed for a double-handed sword, hand, forearm, and wrist strength also come into play. It's not as fundamental, but it's very useful, especially if you're going to the advanced techniques, Brazati, whatever. Okay, now there's another movement we want to look at. I'm going to stand up to show you. Remember I mentioned the deviation of the wrist. So we're all going to be deviants here. Again, I'm grabbing this waster more or less at the balance point and then sliding it down a bit. So I'm lifting this. I'm going to say lifting a weight, but I'm actually lifting against resistance. And depending on your flexibility, you may not go to exactly 45, maybe that's 42 degrees. Who's keeping track? No numbers are written on this thing. That's the beauty of this. You can choke up all you want or move it down a little bit. And nobody's watching you. Nobody's looking at the number on your barbell. Right. Switching to the other side. So this is also a deviation. One direction is called ulnar deviation. And the other is called radial deviation. And I'm moving to this one. Now this particular one, if you can tell me which one is radial deviation and which one's ulnar deviation, you get my appreciation and thanks. So notice this movement here. I'm able to go almost all the way down to this thing and I'm not really taxed myself. Why is that? That is because that's a hammer driving movement, right? That's fundamental. It's probably built into our DNA. If not, it's something you do probably on a daily basis, especially if you're using swords. That's your basic cutting movement. Going back to this guy, keep it in mind, the offhand is going to be weaker, and taking it easy there. And why are we doing the other side? You're a left-handed fencer, why are you doing the left hand? Why am I bothering with this? Balance. That's good enough justification, I think. On the other hand, if you are doing two-handed sword movements and you need strength here, or if you happen to be in a situation where you're using the left hand instead, stay flexible. Keep your options open, right? And you don't want to be one of those people in this sport where this arm is thick and this one's thin, skinny. You want some physical balance because real life, right? So that is your basic routine for your two primal movements of the hand, arm, and wrist that apply towards swordsmanship. The forearm rotation and the forearm hand and wrist deviation. And these are seen in a figure 8 sort of movement, right? See those combining in that way? If you can think of another movement that would apply especially towards swordsmanship, drop me a line, give me information in the comment section. This is a common one for bodybuilders because it basically works on all of the forearm muscles, but it's not specific. You don't really use that so much in swordsmanship. You're not really throwing this against a lot of weight unless you're receiving a hit from that side, in which case that's usually enough strength. It's not as useful because you're not firing your neurons in a specific manner that applies to the specific movement. With these rotational movements, yes you are. And you're training the nerves as much as you are the muscles. So that, again, that's it for the forearm exercise. I've got a couple other things for the shoulders too. Okay, for shoulders, we have something we call the rotator cuff exercises. I'm not going to lie, I'm an old guy. I've been playing with swords for too long, and I'm feeling some effects of arthritis in my shoulders. It's affecting my play and my ability or willingness to practice. Here are some exercises that apply well towards the shoulder exercises. They can be classed as rehab after an injury to help recover from an injury, but sometimes they're also called prehab. Why is it called prehab? Prehab means before you're injured or instead of being injured. So strengthen these muscles. They're actually very small muscles on around the shoulder blade, I should say. And if they're neglected, there's nothing to hold your shoulder together, and it's really easy to get that thrown out of place. So let's make these a part of your exercise routine, and you may never have shoulder problems like I have. So two of the exercises I want to go into, and there are others, but these I think are good ones for swordsmen. There's a bodybuilding exercise called the Cuban press. You start with a dumbbell, holding a dumbbell like this, bring it up, and then go up that way, up and down like that. We're just going to do the first part of it, and we're not going to use a dumbbell. We're using the waist here. We're sort of bracing it against the forearm here because we're not using the wrist to this point. We're focusing on the shoulder joint. So I'm going to try to keep my upper arm sort of flat or horizontal, right? And the upper arm is at a 40. The lower arm is a 90-degree angle. You see that right angle, right? And I'm going to try to move from 45 to 45 here now. And for me, right there, that's as far as I want to go without pain. So what I'm going to do, keep myself in a 45 to 45 situation. I'm not hoping to dislocate my shoulder. I just want to do some exercise for that muscle and make it stronger to keep my shoulder in place. And one to the other side. Obviously this is going to be the same case of being a little stronger on one side than the other, and maybe fewer shoulder problems on this side because that's not my shoulder, that's not my sword hand. But I still want to balance myself out, get the strength going on there. Again, this is a small muscle around the shoulder blade. It's got a fancy Latin name. I'm sure you can find it for me. There's another exercise that we call the empty can. Actually, this is taken from a diagnostic exercise. basically visualize an empty can here, I mean a can, a soda pop, a beer bottle, whatever, and emptying it, right? And you see your shoulder is a sort of unnatural position. Guess what? For a swordsman, it's a very common position, right? So it's really common to be in the middle of a fight, throwing a shot like this, and later on you're going, oh, what happened? Because the muscle that supports that movement around the shoulder blade, this is a different muscle, also unpronounceable name. It is a muscle that you want to have to support this movement. Now again, I'm going to switch this around like this. The hilt of this sword is near my left knee, and I'm bringing it up like this, across my body. And I can feel it. It's not fun, but it's an exercise. If it wasn't a workout, it wouldn't be easy. I mean, that doesn't make sense, does it? If it was easy, it wouldn't be a workout. So notice I'm not doing any action with my wrist here, I'm not flexing my elbow. It's all the shoulder. So you're not trying to get it any higher than the shoulder will allow, because you're working your exercise. You're working your shoulder only. There's the other side. Again, in my case, easy peasy. I could bump this up a little bit, give myself some a challenge here. But for me, it's mostly the right shoulder that hurts. If I switch to a left-handed swordsman, maybe I could do better. I don't know. So these are the shoulder exercises. We did the Cuban lift, and we did the empty can, and those are both helping a couple muscles around the shoulder blade area. If you can come back with the actual names of the muscles, extra points, extra bonus points for you. Let's see, what else is there? That's about it. I mean, if you can come up with any other exercises that would help, that you think would help modern day swordsmen, we can discuss it, we can look at it. It's all good fun. Again, why do I want to do this? Why would I bring this to somebody and say you should do these things? We discussed a beginning swordsman who picks up a basic sword and just can't handle it, can't do the exercises correctly or techniques correctly, or needs to hold it two-handed instead of one-handed. Or older athletes, older sword combat people who are going through rehab, or going through arthritis or whatever. They can make themselves a little stronger and get back to it sooner. Also, I'm thinking somebody who's looking to get to the next level, who's competing. A little bit extra strength here and there may be the deciding factor in some people's sparring performance. So think about that instead as well. Anyway, I think that's about all I can share with you right now. I'll be back with more stuff. Absolutely, and I hope these simple exercises can be applied to your routine and potentially improve your health and performance. Thanks again for watching. If you like this, you know where to hit it. And if you want to see more of it, check to see if you're subscribed. If you haven't, please subscribe, and I'll try to come up with more stuff on a regular basis. Thanks for watching.